Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Today we have new amazing stories, so subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and let's get started. What is the silliest reason you have ever had to fire a staff member? I've got a really good one, man. I'm not a manager or supervisor, but this story is good enough to share here. The supervisor of the paint department at the metal processing facility where I worked was a complete jerk. First off, I had easy and straightforward job duties. As a paint facilitator, my duties included combining paint batches, observing the paint's drying process, trust me, this is a crucial step, and moving components into and out of the curing ovens. These were my primary responsibilities, and I had 8 to 12 hours a day in an area that varied from 19 to 150 feet. To start with, I truly enjoyed my work. We eventually traced this back to our department after we noticed that the paperwork bundle that was shipped with the parts was starting to show discrepancies with each other. Our production manager, who is positioned above the department supervisor, instructed me to keep the passenger with the parts even inside the 3 large ovens, each of which has the capacity to hold a tour bus. Simple job, but busy, as I mentioned. Yes, we used workflow software to track our work orders as well. Orders could be marked as active, on hold, or completed. Once it's marked as finished, it moves on to the next department or process. But sir, the curing rooms, ovens, and high-temp ovens are empty and all the paperwork is accounted for. I was getting a quick drink of water to stay hydrated, and then I was going to meet with other paint facilitators, she filled all the paperwork for us, and see what travelers can be passed to me so that I can pair them with their orders once the painters are done with their current set, I calmly replied. I recalled getting a drink of water to stay hydrated. He yells at me as a lazy POS. He was instantly discouraged and lost, but only momentarily. He asks me to enter more work orders for us in the software a few days later. Everything was going along just fine, perhaps a little too nicely for his liking. In order to account for this, I wrote down all of the work order serial numbers that I had logged, signed and dated the paper, and hid it under the keyboard. As luck would have it, I see him approaching and he tells me that I'm doing something incorrectly and that I should go back where I ought to be to let him take care of the terminal. That's okay, I'll let him dig his own hole and discover how far upstream he is after that. He calls me back after about 30 minutes and asks what I did wrong to make things so bad. I was shocked to see what he was talking about because I didn't think he would have logged nearly 5 times as much as I had. The next department asked why the orders were still in our primary staging area without even being started because more than half of them were incomplete orders that he had recorded as complete. Many were put on hold when they shouldn't have been. Yes, I am the one who made this mistake. The fact that the software was created from the ground up by a corporate programmer who was at the time employed by my supervisor, the guy who dug his own hole, made things better. Yes, indeed, he was standing there observing us from behind. My supervisor starts yelling that if employees in lower positions can't understand the software, it's useless. Its creator turns to face me and inquires about the orders I've completed. Finally, the time I've been waiting for has arrived. That was just over 30 minutes ago, I tell him, turning to face him with grace. I had kept track of every order I logged under the keyboard, and my supervisor had removed me from the terminal so he could log orders. My cheeks turned pale, and I laughed. He probably detested that. The creator dude takes a seat, looks around the entire workspace, and locates my work orders with ease. After pointing out that all the incorrectly logged orders were completed in the previous 30 minutes, he stands up and makes his way back to the offices. He held onto my list. I went back to work. After this, I began to hear for a few weeks about work orders going missing or mismatched, but mostly it was 1 or 2 at a time. It's true that this problem was traced back to our department. I was able to estimate the situation fairly well, but I was reluctant to speak until I had more proof. A growing number of travelers were being mismatched as the days passed. Because of this, I had a brief meeting with the production manager without my supervisor in attendance. To make sure I understood my role, he had me perform or explain my job duties to him. After assuring me that I understood every aspect of my job, he asked me to speculate as to what might be causing these problems. I used that opportunity to share multiple stories of incidents involving me and my supervisor, some of which I haven't shared yet, and to speculate that, because of his seeming distaste for me, my supervisor was most likely the one who was checking my work by sneaking into the ovens and scrubbing things in there. Then the prod guy says, okay, let's move some security cameras to different angles to best capture this behavior. Then he informs me that since the supervisor's having trouble, he would have to relocate me to another area of the facility if he continued in this manner. I told him that if I were transferred, I'd prefer not to work in paint prep because, well, it's just board sanding and I'd taken 2 years of wood shop in high school. As expected, a few more days passed before I finally caught him red-handed. The oven doors have windows. They're really filthy, but they let me see just fine. I saw him enter an oven that I had just loaded and completely mess up every work order. The door was slightly ajar because of his stupid A. I would have had to force it shut with a loud clank if it had been closed correctly. Rather, I gently parted it just enough to allow my head to peek inside, and I stood there for a while. When he was done, he turned around at last and saw me. I believe I had previously seen him terrified. I told him to correct his error. He said that even if I went to HR about it, there wouldn't be any proof and that I could fix it for him since it's my job anyway. I then made the 3 new cameras public. He bolted. No big deal, I matched the work orders again. I simply didn't want to linger in the ovens longer than necessary. Nobody has yet been let go. All of this was background information. Despite my admission to HR that I couldn't work an 8-hour shift without getting tired or putting in extra overtime, I ended up in paint prep. It's boring as H and not an easy task. It's acceptable to sand bare metal in order to prepare it for the first coat, but most of the time we have to sand the paint down to a slightly thinner layer. Yes, you would think that removing 0.001 inches of aircraft-grade paint would be very simple. No, it takes ages. In actuality, I move too slowly. Does that indicate to you how dull the work was? I was also nodding off. Because of overstaffing, I was walked off, which is okay because I wasn't the only one. I was also highly expendable at the time because I was only a temp agent. This is the humorous part. My former supervisor in the paint department was fired just 3 days after I lost my job. No, not for any of the earlier exchanges. He decided, and he's absolutely right, that the second shift painters couldn't do their jobs properly, so he starts painting by himself. We use paint that has a chromium base, which is extremely carcinogenic in liquid form. He's also not authorized to paint in any capacity. He has worked in the paint industry for 20 years, but he has no idea how to paint properly because, prior to working at the facility, he had never even heard of chromium-based paints. Along with not using the PPE, he also fails to use the following: 1 filtration mask and unit, 1 Tyvek tissue suit, 1 pair of thick gloves larger than 5 millimeters, and 1 filtration unit air filter. In addition to this, he completely ruined the role. It belonged to an F-35. Lockheed has put in place some stringent guidelines in case a contractor makes a mistake. In some situations, we can chemically bathe, and in other situations, we can bead blast up to a maximum of X times. We have to return the part and issue a full refund for the work order if, after X attempts, we're still unable to fix the part. This part has already undergone bathing X and bead blasting X. He was fired. How did you come to the realization that the COA, HOA, and neighbors are jerks? The people who lived next door to my parents for more than 20 years were really annoying. They were kind enough to let us use the side of our property so they could bring and take their motorcycles out of their yard. As a thank you, they warmed up their bikes every morning at 6 a.m. for 20 minutes. Because their son was bored, my mom found him taking apart the garden shed that my great-grandfather had built. The damage was too great to fix, so the shed had to be torn down. He and his friends picked on me when I was a kid and a teen. One time, they chased me into my house and threw water balloons at me through open doors and windows. He didn't need me any other way. The wife/mother was crazy. She came over to trim our front hedges while she was drunk. They were cut up into different sizes and shapes and then destroyed. It took years for them to grow back. To be nice, she did this. She often got mad that my parents only used one of their 2 driveways and that it wasn't fair to her. She said that people were selfish for parking on the street when they had driveways in a public Facebook group for our suburb. This was because my mom would often park on the street during her lunch and afternoon breaks because she was afraid of getting hit by other drivers when she backed out of her driveway. This woman and her family would never, ever just ask to use our driveway, which we would have been happy to let them use. I'll say more about that later. When my son was a teenager, he wanted to play his guitar on the front porch at full volume. When he wouldn't turn it down, my mom called the police, which started the volume wars. As a retired person, my mom works all year as a crossing guard, which is a pretty dangerous job. In the summer, she gets to spend time in her yard and pool. When she wants to listen to music on her iPhone, she plugs in a small speaker. The neighbors then told my mom that they don't like hearing her music in their yard. It's not loud, they just don't want to hear it. They start making threats about city noise laws and calling the police on her a few times, but each time they're turned down. Things got so bad last summer that my mom would turn her speaker down to a whisper just to keep the peace. At the end of summer, she got a letter from a neighbor woman that was rambling and crazy, and in it, the woman vented all of her hate for my mom and me. Her son said he felt bad that I didn't want to be friends with him. She sent a check for the damaged bushes, which my mom properly cashed. She once walked up to my mom in the street and said, "I just found out I have cancer, so now you have to be nice to me." My mom didn't understand what she meant and politely ignored her. And finally, this year, they gave up and put their house on the market. But leaving wasn't all bad. They needed a big moving van because they were moving to a different province. I'll be honest, my mom was trying to start a fight here. Because the moving van was in the way of one of her driveways, she asked them to move it. In the street, my mom could hear the crazy neighbors yelling at her. She said they could have been polite and asked if they had to block the driveway. We don't know they're movers, but one of them walked up to my mom and threatened to punch her out. That's when my mom yelled, "Everybody knows you're skipping town because you owe half the street money." This made the neighbors very angry. It turned out that this was enough for my neighbors to call the police on my mom for lying. Yes, those were the exact words the neighbor lady said. It was clear that the police didn't like this. They also told the neighbors that even though we gave them permission, they couldn't block our driveway and made them move the truck. I was formerly a resident of an HOA community. The micromanagement was completely nonsensical. The situation reached a tipping point when the board at the time issued a large number of violation notices, called a meeting, and greatly irritated the public. One of those was a paralegal, and they dug through everything they could find to slam them on, and much like Al Capone, they were taken down on a technicality. As per the law, a 30-day notice was required, and it transpired that their notices of the meeting had been postmarked only 29 days prior. The entire meeting was deemed moot, as verified by their lawyer, who was in attendance. There was already so much hate in the room that it could be cut with a knife, and the board quit right there to avoid having to deal with it because they had just been shown to be incompetent and unable to follow the law, even though they were teaching everyone else about it. Shortly after, the highly despised property manager who worked for the previous board wasn't a resident and probably had a contract in place so the new board couldn't fire him arbitrarily, found that all 4 of his truck's tires had been slashed. The manager did very little of value other than drive around all the time taking pictures of alleged violations and taping notices on doors. This gentle nudge caused him to resign right away. Since then, I've moved, and no effing HOA was my top priority. Some of the times I asked around, I was told, yes, there's a homeowners association, but they don't do anything. I don't care if it doesn't accomplish anything right now, but if some small-time despots get a hair up their A, that doesn't mean it won't turn into a nightmare down the road. Having one never in the first place is the only remedy. I ended up on a street that's split in half by a newer development. My house is on the land that was laid out in the 1920s and is not in an HOA, and neither is the house across the street from me. However, every other house on that side of the street is in an HOA. I don't have to give two S's about whatever rules they might have because it's not my problem. Guys, thank you for all the support and videos. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.